My name is Matt George. I work with Sports 1140 KHDK. That's the radio station here in Sacramento. We're the flagship radio station for the Sacramento Kings. So naturally, I host a podcast about the Sacramento Kings called the Locked On Kings podcast. So specifically, this is Sports Podcasting 101, but I'm actually going to branch it out a little bit broader and just talk about podcasting as a whole a little bit today. Because while sports is important to me, it might not be as important to you or the career field that you want to go in. And the best part about podcasting to me is that it's so broad that it fits everything in. Podcasting today is what I call Netflix for your ears, essentially. You can listen to anything you want for multiple different purposes, whether it's entertainment, whether it's educational, whether it's political. Podcasts exist for almost everything now. And to me, someone who is young, I'm 25 years old, growing up in the evolving radio industry, a lot of people have told me career-wise, hey, be careful what you're doing. Radio is dying. Radio is not the same as it used to be, not as popular as it used to be, and that's true. How many of you actually listen to the radio when you're driving versus listen to music on your MP3 player or a podcast now? Most people, well, good, radio listeners. I love you people. You guys are my friends. But most people now, when they drive, they listen to their MP3 players, iPods, phones, things like that. I don't know if iPods exist. They were cool when I was in school. But what's for me, sports podcasting in general, is proof that sports radio and radio in general isn't dying. It's just evolving. Because podcasting essentially is radio. It's a talk format radio show. It's just on demand like Netflix is. So Netflix is just TV on demand. It's movies on demand. You can watch it whenever you want, commercial free. Podcasting is kind of the same idea. So today, hopefully, I'll give you a better understanding of what podcasting is and hopefully pique your interest in it. I'll also have right up here, I can give you everything that you're going to need to start a podcast if you would like to start a podcast, which I highly encourage you to do so if you have any interest in it whatsoever, just to try it out. And then we will do questions, answers. I can answer any questions that you may have. If you have any questions at any time, feel free to just put your hands up and stop me. I'm happy to answer anything that I have. I don't know if you could hear it too well. I was playing my podcast when you guys first came in this morning. The Locked On Kings podcast, which I host every single weekday, Monday through Friday. It comes out. I host it from the KHDK studios, which are just outside of downtown Sacramento. And the episode that I was playing for you was an episode that I recorded on Thursday when Doug Christie joined me. Doug Christie, Sacramento Kings legend, now works with us at KHDK, is also the TV broadcaster for the Sacramento Kings, or one of them. He joined me on that podcast episode. And a little bit about me, first and foremost. I grew up a diehard fan of the Sacramento Kings. I grew up in Sacramento. I went to school in Roseville at Wood Creek High School, so I'm familiar with the high school scenes around here. So I'm in the same boat as many of you, or many of you will be, about to be going through the high school ranks, which is awesome. Enjoy everything about it. Being able to grow up and listen to KHDK radio and watch the Sacramento Kings and be a fan of the Sacramento Kings, to be able to translate that into a career was something I didn't know that I wanted to do right away, but I discovered over time. And one of the great parts about this career field, about media in general, is media, you can take your time on it and you can build a passion with it that, in my opinion, is different from anything else that you'll do. You're never going to be a master at it, ever. It's always evolving. It's always changing. It's technology in a nutshell. But it gives you an opportunity to take what you're interested in, take what you love to do, and just be a storyteller. Or talk about the things that you want to talk about. If you have friends that have similar interests as you do, to be able to sit down at a table and have a conversation with them and record that conversation for entertainment purposes of other people is really what it's all about. So I'm going to be going through essentially things that you need to know, what you need to have when you podcast, things to avoid, things to do, and then we'll have fun with questions and answers. And again, anytime, stop me, ask any questions. I'm happy to answer them for you. What makes a podcast unique is essentially every podcast can be looked up based off of an interest that you have. So if I'm interested in the Sacramento Kings, I look up Sacramento Kings on a podcast provider, and hopefully my podcast comes up, along with a bunch of other Kings podcasts that are out there, including some that my friends and competitors do. If you're a fan of video games, there's video game podcasts. Politics, there's politics podcasts. There's anything that you could, almost everything that you might have an interest in, there's probably a podcast out there for it. But that's what gets you in the door. What keeps you there are the personalities and the people, and you become attached with them. And the key to podcasting for me, and the important part, well, that's gone. The important part to note for if you're interested in starting a podcast is that you want to be as relatable as you possibly can, and you also want to recognize that people are not just sitting there listening to you from afar and you're not just talking down to them. It's a conversational area. So the idea is when you're recording a podcast or you are listening to a podcast, you want to feel like you are at the table with a bunch of different people who are also listening or talking with you. One of the best parts one of the best things you can do while you're recording a podcast is open up and throw out general questions or general topics and things like that, and pause for a second, because it actually gives your audience an opportunity to answer those questions either in their head or sometimes vocalize them. I know a lot of people, I do it. I'll be listening to podcasts, listening to radio shows while I'm driving, and someone will ask a question and I start talking to my steering wheel because that's what I do with my life. So it's the difference between a podcast where you're just sitting there listening, uninvolved, and actively participating in it or feel like you're actively participating in it. That's what separates a okay podcast or a fine podcast from a really, really good podcast, because those are the people that you're going to start feeling attached to, you're going to be interested in, you're going to care more about what they think, they're going to care more about what you think. As long as you are making sure to engage your audience and try to do everything that you can to bring them in and make sure they are just as much of a part of the show as you are, and you're sharing the same interests. I'm a Kings fan. I started as a Kings fan. Now I'm in professional media. I'm talking to people like me every day on a Kings podcast. I'm just talking to myself, and I'm interviewing people that are hopefully in the same boat as me or have the same interests as I do, and that creates a community. The Locked On Kings podcast, when it started, was actually not hosted by me. It was hosted by Jason Ross, who is the program director over at Sports 1140 KHTK. He's also the color commentator or partner of Gary Gerald on the Sacramento Kings play-by-play radio broadcast. And when Jay Ross passed the podcast over to me, it was about 2.5, 3 years ago. We averaged about 400 to 500 listeners a podcast, which starting out is phenomenal. Now we've been able to work it up to, over the last 3 years, slowly building a community of around 2,000 to 2,500 people that listen to every single episode. And that's still just scratching the surface of the numbers that we want. But if you think about it not just as a number, but as 2,500 people that are willing to listen to you every single day and hear your voice and care about what you think about, it's pretty cool. It's a pretty awesome feeling to have that influence, that power, and to have that community that you get to interact with. One of my favorite things to do is usually once a month I'll do what I call fans only podcasts, where I invite listeners of the podcast from anywhere, all over the world. I've had international listeners, I've had local listeners from Sacramento, from other states, that I bring onto the show and I just interview them. And to me, it's one of my favorite things to do because it gives them an opportunity to tell their story and for the community to hear not from me, but from people that are also like them that also listen to the podcast. And it's done wonders for my podcast, for the numbers. Those shows always do phenomenal. And it reminds me, and it's a good reminder for me, that people are coming to listen about the Kings, but they're staying to listen for me. They're staying to listen for their fellow Kings fans. They're staying to listen to because they feel like they're part of a group and part of a community. And that's one of the things I want to have you understand when you leave here today, is that if you host a podcast, which you all should, or at least try it or listen to a podcast, you want to make sure you feel like part of a community as much as you possibly can. That is like the number one rule for me in podcasting, is be different and invite people in and make sure you're doing what you're doing to create community and create conversation rather than sit on a pedestal and talk down to people. People do that. There are podcasts like that, and if that's your cup of tea, that's fantastic. But to me, that's not what podcasting is about, and that's not what it should be. It should be a place for sharing, should be a place for conversation, and always a place for learning. Always you can learn, whether you listen to whatever podcast you listen to, you can always learn something and always grow from something, especially if you're hearing people's opinions or conversations that are different from your own. And when you're listening, some podcasts have revolving hosts, different things like that. I'm part of a podcast network, the Locked On Podcast Network, to where every single team has a podcast, and then we have a national show. And our national show has a bunch of different hosts to it, and that style can work as well, but different people listen on different days because they know the host that they like is going to be on that specific day. That's, in essence, what we love to do, and we want to make that connection so that you will come to hear about the Kings, or you will come to hear about the Chiefs, or whoever, or hear about the Warrior Kid, things like that. You'll come to hear about that stuff, but you stay for the stories and for the personalities. My wife listens to a podcast. I don't know if this is appropriate to share, but it's a great podcast. It's called My Favorite Murder. It's a crime podcast, and crime podcasts are extremely popular. I can't get my wife to listen to my podcast, but she'll listen to that podcast every day. And it's hosted by two female comedians who basically every single show, they do it once a week, they share crazy forensic file murder mystery stories, and they basically what's called riff off of them. They just talk about them, and they're comedic and they're funny. And you come to the podcast because you're interested in maybe murder or crimes or things like that, and they tell fascinating stories, but you end up staying. I find myself, when my wife is listening to it, listening in because I want to hear what they have to say and how they joke and make light of a pretty serious situation that ultimately brings entertainment and education at the same time. And that, my wife is hooked to that podcast. She doesn't watch crime shows. She doesn't care about that at all, but she's hooked to that podcast because she loves those two women, and they're influential and they're funny and they entertain her on a daily basis. So they are perfect examples of what we essentially try to do. So if you want to actually host a podcast, though, you need a few things. And again, I encourage everybody to, if you have any interest in something whatsoever, and maybe you have a friend or two that's interested as well, and you want to share that or discuss that, or make similar to making a YouTube video about something, podcasting is a very easy an efficient way to put stuff out there and to record conversations that you have with your friends or connect with others. And again, a good way for you, even as a host, to get further connected into a community of people that maybe aren't available to you at your school. If you're a fan of a team and nobody else at your school is, or few people at your school are, by hosting a podcast or being involved in podcasts, you can get connected with people from other schools and other walks of life that have the same interest as you do. Which I highly recommend. But hopefully you will understand by the time you leave here and have what you need in order to be a podcast host. So I thought I would share with you, essentially, 3 out of these 4 things are free, which is awesome. You can almost do a podcast, host a podcast today for free. Yes? My podcast is on, so you can get it on Spotify. It's on demand. So you can get it on Spotify. You can get it on Podbean, on iTunes, on Amazon. You can get it. You can find it basically everywhere that podcasts are, which is pretty cool. And I'll share with you more a little bit about how to get there and what to do and where to post and things like that here in actually just a second. But if you want to start a podcast, these are some of the things that can help you right away. Number 2 is the only thing that costs money, and I understand money can be a hurdle sometimes. So I'll talk about that in its own right. But all you need in order to start a podcast is you need some kind of recording software. You need a microphone or even something like, please hold, like this, little recorders, things like that, just to record yourself. Obviously, you need to have a microphone or something to be able to record your voice so you can put it somewhere. But you need that. You need if you want to do interviews in podcasts, which I highly recommend, which are extremely important, you don't have to go and buy really fancy software, an audio board or things. All you need is Google Hangouts or Skype, and both of them are free to download onto your phone or onto your computer. Open broadcast software is another thing I highly recommend. This is what how many people watch YouTube or watch streams, like streams on Twitch and things like that? Almost everybody uses open broadcast software. It is completely free. It runs completely off of your computer. You can run all of your audio through it. It records your computer screen. It records audio for you. You don't even need a microphone half the time when you use open broadcast software because it'll work with your computer. If your computer has like a built-in webcam or things like that, there's also built-in microphones. So open broadcast software can use that and take that microphone and record you there. And with audio software, you can just separate the audio from the video and be able to put it out as a podcast. But Audacity is what I recommend. And again, this is completely free. The most professionals, and what I use on a daily basis, is Adobe Premiere and Adobe Audition. And Adobe products are phenomenal. All the professionals use them. They're also expensive as all heck. They are ridiculously expensive. You do not need the best equipment. You do not need the best software. You do not need all of the fancy bells and whistles to put on a good podcast. All you need is something to record your voice, to get your voice out there, maybe a friend, and a good topic and a great personality. That's really all you need. So do not be discouraged by, same thing with YouTube videos. Do not be discouraged if you want to start something but feel like you don't have the greatest stuff. Because that draws in some people, sure. Some people might listen to a podcast and stop listening after 3 seconds because it's not a perfect, crisp-sounding voice as if I'm whispering in their ear. But I've learned that's really the minority. Honestly, that's the minority. All you need is the bare bones stuff to at least get you started, and then hopefully you can advance to where your podcast is so successful and has such a high demand that you can start to upgrade certain things. But don't worry, I would not worry about that at all right now. Again, Audacity, which is this program that's up right here, can record anything at any time, blah, 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 blah. There, it recorded. Completely free, and you can use this to do everything you need to do to edit your podcast, add music in. If you want to trim certain things, cut certain episodes, this will do everything for you, and there are plenty of tutorials and everything online to show you what you need for that. But microphones, obviously, are the most important part of your podcasting, other than the content and what you bring to it. But technology-wise, microphones are going to be a pretty significant difference maker in the quality of content that you put out. And if you are able to eventually work your way up to one of these points, these two microphones, the Blue Snowball, which is what you see on the screen, and the Blue Yeti microphone, which is this guy, this is what I use. This Blue Yeti microphone is, you can get usually anywhere between $85 and $115, depending upon what time of the year you buy it and where you go to purchase them. But I got mine off of Amazon for about an hour. I got mine off of Amazon for about $100. I don't know where my brain's going there. And I record countless hours on it. So there you go. I brought it all back around. But that microphone right there is what gives you this quality. Just to set our expectations and keep the conversation going heading into the start of next season. This will not be every single episode for the remainder of this. Shut up. Enough of me. Now back to me. That microphone there are professional microphones that are thousands of dollars. That microphone right there is $100, around that range, and it gives you radio quality. You do not need the best. But if $100 is too expensive, and I completely understand $100 is expensive to me now, this is the Blue Snowball. It is made by the same company. It is around $50, although I've seen it get as low as like $35, $40. This thing is barely a step down in quality. I can notice it because I've listened to enough of my dumb voice that I can hear it, but most people will not be able to tell the difference. $50 maximum usually for that thing right there, and you can have a high quality podcast. Yeah.
We have some of those at the production company at my school.
Awesome. See, these little guys are amazing, and they're USB, so they plug right into your laptop, your computer at home, and these guys are plug and play. There's no extensive setup or anything like that. You plug it into the side of your computer, you open up Audacity, which is this guy, You open this guy up, you hit record, and you start talking. Or you open up open broadcast software, you hit record, and you start talking. And the quality is going to be there for you. You don't have to add any like sparkles or glow ups in post edit or anything like that. You're going to be good to go basically from microphones like that. So I highly recommend those. If you really want to invest into podcasting and try and do it, I highly recommend. Honestly, Blue Yeti's fantastic if you can get there. Start with a Blue Snowball and you might not change anything for years. That honestly might be how it is. But I saw a hand over here. No? Cool. Awesome. So that's everything essentially you need to have for podcasting. Explaining, if I can explain Google Hangouts and Skype a little bit more. Most people know what Skype is, right? How you can talk to your friends. Skype is actually a little more outdated now. I don't necessarily use it as much. Google Hangouts is amazing. Google Hangouts was actually created for business purposes to where business people on other ends of the world, all they have to do is, with a press of a button, I can talk to somebody through my webcam and hear their voice and everything on the other end of the world. It's just basic conversation, but it's a lot less hassle than Skype is. You don't have to download anything for Google Hangouts. It just runs off your browser. Same basic principle for if you're doing an interview for a podcast, or let's say you and your friend want to start a sports podcast, or you and your friend want to start a video games podcast or anything like that. If you can't get together personally and record it yourselves, if you both have a microphone set up at home, you can use Google Hangouts to record a good quality podcast right then and there. All one person, both sides can record on their own, but all you need is one person recording, and you've got a do a show with multiple voices. And it's not just two. I've done interviews for my podcast on Google Hangouts. I did a roundtable with 3 professional basketball players. One was in Indiana, one was in Houston, and one was here in Sacramento, and myself. And we all ran it off of there. It's really, really easy to do. Again, you don't need an audio board or anything super fancy to do that. Yeah. Basketball players. So one was Isaiah Thomas, who's a former Sacramento King. One was Iman Shumpert, who's now with the Brooklyn Nets. And the other one was Darren Collison. He was the one that was in Indiana. He is now retired. But these are all guys that I've interacted with and I've gotten the opportunity to talk to both through my work and through podcasting. So, and that's the cool thing too. Podcasting will take you to a lot of areas that you never expected to go. And the cool part about podcasting is that it's become so popular nowadays with so many people that a lot of big names or people that you may want to talk to that you normally feel like you can't approach are willing to come on with you in a podcast setting because they know they're having a conversation about something they enjoy. Most professionals have either been on a podcast or have a podcast. There are now professional athletes that do their own podcast. CJ McCollum, who is a basketball player with the Portland Trail Blazers, has one of the most successful basketball podcasts out there. That's amazing that players nowadays are able to, during their off time, pop a microphone and record what they want to record and record their conversations with professional athletes, and millions of people listen to them. I mean, it's always available to you. Yeah.
Have you ever done a broadcast at the King Stadium?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I actually work at the Golden One Center. I'll be there tomorrow for Kings and Celtics. But I go to every single Kings home game. I don't travel with the team quite yet, thankfully for me and my wife. But I do travel to all the home games. I'm in the locker room. I get audio with players, have conversations with players, have relationships with players. And that's access that I got more through KHDK and more through this radio station than actually through podcasting. But with podcasting, I've been able to approach these guys in a whole new light, to where after games with KHDK, you're getting sound. It's kind of a more professional type setting, more rigid. You're asking them questions about basketball, they answer, you move on type thing. Podcasts have allowed me to sit down with De'Aaron Fox, the human being, not De'Aaron Fox, the basketball player, and get to know more about him and spend 20 to 30 minutes just chatting with him. One of my favorite Kings players of all time, he's no longer a King, his name's Costa Koufos. And he was a big man and a total goofball, played a little bit, but not a whole lot, but he was my absolute favorite guy to talk to because we did about 3 or 4 podcasts where we sat down and we talked about basketball for maybe 5 minutes. The rest we talked about movies and cars, which is what he loves. And that's you only get that in sports podcasting. You don't get that anywhere else. To get personality and to get the human being behind the name, you can get that, I think, through podcasting better than everybody else. When there's a camera on you, like now, hi, You perform a little bit more. You know, okay, people are watching me. I'm a little rigid. I have to make sure I'm saying the right things, and especially professional athletes who know that people are going to be listening and breaking down and tearing apart everything they say. In a podcast setting, the best thing you can get them to do is relax. Because once people relax and just have a conversation, organic conversation, which is you pretty much only get from radio and podcasting, organic conversation is the best you're going to get. When you make people forget, and you personally forget that you're recording, and you just have a conversation with somebody, that is like the zen that you can get to in podcasting, where you're just having a conversation with somebody, and it turns out to be really entertaining because we're all storytellers. We all have stories to tell. We all want to talk about certain things that we're interested in, but we all feel like we have something to share, and that's obvious because social media is what it is today. Social media was not around when I was in elementary school, got more popular in middle school and in high school. Now I am out of college, I'm a 25-year-old, and somehow feel compelled to share what I had for dinner. That is where we are at now as a society. We all have stories to tell. We all have things we want to share. Podcasting is the most, in my opinion, the most personal and compelling and realistic and real sharing that you can do, because you're not acting. It's really difficult to act in a podcast because it's really easy to hear through acting. If you're trying not to be yourself, if you're trying to be a character or somebody fake, it's really easy to tell when you're just listening to audio and you're not looking at a face. Really easy to tell. So most of the time, you can't do it. Successful podcasts are people that are just being themselves, either with their friends or people that share interests with them. And others are drawn to that. I am drawn by people who are talking about I'm drawn to people that are talking about something that I'm interested in, that I think are authentic and real, and that I would say, yeah, I would be friends with that person and want to listen to that person. That's the ultimate goal of a podcast. That's what we're trying to get to overall. Let's see, where am I going here? So, keys to a successful and enjoyable podcast. I've talked about some of these already, but specific topic or theme is very important. I would recommend, if you're starting a podcast, start as specific as you possibly can and go from there. Wake up. Wake up. If you want to talk about basketball or the NBA, maybe start with a team or a group of teams specifically. Don't try and tackle all of the NBA in one show. It's a lot to get to, and you'll probably miss something, and you're going for a pretty broad audience. But and there might be more people that listen to you right away, but less people are going to stick, at least in my opinion. If you are really interested in, I keep bringing up video games. I love video game podcasts. I'm a terrible video game player. I barely play video games at all, but I love video game podcasts because I think you get phenomenal personalities. If you start with a genre, a game, or a specific game to talk about rather than the gaming industry as a whole, it's going to be a lot better and a lot easier for you. If you like political podcasts, good luck. I'm not going to touch that, but I would imagine it would be better to start specifically about a viewpoint or a topic rather than trying to solve all of the country's problems. Just set yourself up for success. Don't set yourself up for too big of a task that you can't handle. My podcasts, we do Monday through Friday. Typically, I didn't release an episode this Friday. But typically we do Monday through Friday, and each episode is between 23 to 30 minutes. That's what we try and shoot for. To start, shorter is always better, in my opinion, because it's hard to keep attention. It's hard to keep anybody's attention. It's hard to keep my own attention up here. That's why I said an hour the other day. I was gone. But making sure that you can have something, at least to start, that is unique, that is interesting, and that can keep somebody around for the full time. That's your only goal to start. Do as much as you can to have as short of a podcast or as comfortable of a length of podcast as possible, to where someone can get through it in one sitting and want to come back for more. At that point, then, you can start adding on to it. You can make your podcast an hour long if you have a specific guest that you really want to talk to, or a specific topic that's just too big for one episode type thing. At that point, you can make it longer, but I encourage you to always start small and make sure that you can keep things as condensed as possible, and try and do your best to make sure your audience is paying attention to you for as long as you possibly can. Unique personality is extremely important. You are going to find that 10 people have already done a similar podcast to what you're trying to do, and maybe 9 of them have the other names that you wanted, the other titles of podcasts. It happens all the time. Coming up with a title for a podcast sucks because everybody's come up with it before already. That's a perfect example of how there are a lot of people that are doing the same thing. The blessing and the curse of a podcast. The blessing is that anybody can do it. The curse is that anybody can do it. Meaning you, myself, everybody today, we can record a podcast and put it out there if we want for people to listen to. But that means you now have more competition because everybody in the world can do the same thing. It didn't used to be that way. With radio, it was just us, and you had to listen to us, and if you didn't like it, turn the radio off and sit in silence. Now you have options. So how do you get people to select and stick with your show specifically and want to come to your show? Your personality, the energy that you bring, the guests that you have, but mainly, first and foremost, you. People come to my podcast at first to hear about the Kings. They stay if they like me. They stay if they want to hear more from me or about me or from my co-hosts or from my guests. Engaging with the audience also is very important as well. And certain podcasts, you get to a point where you can almost be too big for this, and I recognize that. Certain podcasts that have hundreds of thousands of listeners a day can't exactly get to know their listeners and their audience as well as they might want to. What I do with my 2,000 listeners or 2,500 listeners or sometimes 1,500 listeners, depending upon the time of the year or the topic, I always throw out my contact information, my social media account, an email address so that I can always have people approach me and send me messages. Just a second, buddy. And send me messages and I can interact with them personally. That, to me, goes a long way to this person cares about me, wants to talk to me, so I should be giving them that respect back. And that builds a relationship. And suddenly, that person is 10 times more likely to want to continue to listen to my podcast because they feel like they have a connection and relationship with me. The funny part is, in sports radio and in radio in general and putting anything out publicly, you're going to get people that don't like you. And because it's anonymous, they're going to be able to say whatever they want without consequence. What's funny is, our joke in sports radio is that the people that like you the least are usually your biggest fans because they listen to everything you do, because they want to listen to find something to yell at you for. But they're still listening, and that's all that matters to you. And if you connect with those people, I've had a lot of them that have said something anonymously about me or said something and never expected to get a response. I respond to them, ask them a question, or try and engage with them, and suddenly those people like me now because I gave them the time of day and want to talk to them. I'm not saying it always works. That's like 1 out of every 10. But I've created listeners and I've created relationships with people that I normally would never through engaging with them. So engaging with your audience, I think, is extremely important, making sure that if it's your friends listening, you want your friends to be listening. You don't want strangers to be listening to you. It's impossible to know everybody, but if you feel connected with people, they not only feel more obligated to listen to you, they feel obligated to share you with others because it's important to them. And that's how you grow as a podcast overall. You had a question?
Oh, you answered.
Oh, perfect. See, I'm way ahead of you. Let's see. Engaging with audiences, and that kind of pours into social media presence. How many of us in here have social media accounts? Twitter, Facebook, heck, even YouTube, Instagram. Social media is extremely essential in anything that you do in media today. Anything that you do, you need to have social media because it's free advertising. That's what it is. It's free advertising for you. It allows you, gives you that opportunity to share what you have, be your voice even outside your podcast itself. I'm very active on Twitter. That's where I'm most active, but I also have a Facebook. I also have an Instagram. Every time a podcast episode comes out, I tweet about it, send it out there, and somehow it might get to someone that I've never reached before. That's all I really need to say about social media. Most people know how it works, but social media is extremely important. Final couple things for you. I'm just going to tell you a couple things of what to avoid when podcasting, and then we'll do just some Q&A and have some fun for the rest of it. Like I said, there are a lot of people that are doing the same podcast that you're doing or are doing the same topic that you're doing when podcasting. If you mimic anybody, you're not going to succeed. you need to be unique. And that's difficult to start out because there are sports podcasters that I listen to that I love the way they do it, and I want to do it just like them because I know it works. But if I do it just like them, I'm just being them, and they're going to go back. The audience is going to go back to them anyway. Like, that's the point. Developing your own voice, and I'm going to get you in a second, buddy. Developing your own voice is not easy at all. It takes time, and it's going to be something that you discover about yourself as time goes on. So again, don't expect when you first record your first episode to be perfect. In fact, if you make it big, congratulations. And when you do make it big, or even a year, start recording a podcast, record a podcast for the entire year, and go back and listen to your first ever episode. You're going to want to scream. It's going to be that bad. I listened to podcasts that I've recorded a year ago, and I want to quit my job. You are always going to be developing. You're always going to be growing your unique voice, and how you sound and your opinions and things like that are always going to be evolving. Let them evolve and be unique and be yourself, and don't be afraid to continue to say and act how you want to act and be who you want to be and believe what you want to believe if your audience doesn't necessarily like it, or if someone who's more popular than you has a different opinion than you. That's not authentic. People are able to hear through that, and it'll come back to bite you more than it'll like you. Like, good example of that. Kings played the Lakers last night. Kings lost by 2 points, a buzzer beater at the end. See? He says it's supposed to be a foul. About 95% of people agree with him. I don't think so. I think it was. I'm a Kings fan. I hate the Lakers more than anything else on this planet. I'm okay with the no foul call there. Just based off of my experience, what I know from the NBA, watching the game, the moment, I'm okay with the no foul call. People don't like that I'm okay with the no foul call. That's fine. That's my opinion. I'm going to talk about it on my podcast on Monday. And I guarantee you there are going to be 10 other Kings podcasts that talk about how it should be a foul call. Suddenly, mine's different. Now, you can choose to listen or not. That's up to you. But my podcast now is different and more authentic because it's genuinely what I believe. That's not easy to do. And I'm not tooting my own horn here because I'm as guilty of it as everybody else is. So take your time, develop who you are as a voice, and just do not mimic anybody else. It will be the worst thing that you can do in podcasting is just trying to mimic anybody else. You need a place to post your podcast when you create one. Podbean, I highly recommend. It's super, super easy. All you have to do is record your podcast, you have an MP3 file, and you upload it to Podbean, you title it, and then it's there. It lives there. And then you can share it, you can link it through that. People can go onto Podbean and type in whatever topic that maybe yours is about. For me, it's Sacramento Kings. People type up Sacramento Kings, and my podcast is immediate up there with the rest. Podbean, I highly recommend both to listen to podcasts and to post your own podcasts. Podbean, Podbean. Last thing that I can say to avoid when podcasting is just rehashing information. If you're just reading something, a document online for a sports podcast, if you're reading just a box score from the game the night before, or stats or things like that, people are going to stop caring. They're going to get bored because they can get that just by looking at a document online or going to a website. Rehashing information, there's a very fine line between just telling people things and sharing things with people in a unique way, in a unique voice that's entertaining or informative. I can take a box score from the Kings and Lakers last night, and I can read through that box score, and I can share stats and share numbers, and then tie my own opinions into that. Like, Harrison Barnes had 20 points. Okay, Harrison Barnes did this, this, and this really well, but struggled in this area. Suddenly, that's a lot more unique, and they're getting more content from that and more of my opinion rather than just a number that they could get from a document. Does that make sense? Make sure you are taking information and making it your own. And it's actually not that hard to do. It's an opinion. It's having an opinion on something. Take a game that you love, take a history lesson that you love, take anything that you love and apply yourself to it and apply your own opinions to it. And suddenly you're not rehashing information anymore. You're making it your own. So, but if you're just rehashing information, it sounds like a shopping list. It gets boring, it gets redundant, and people will tune out. Those are the two main things to me to avoid in podcasting other than ignoring your audience. But I think I made that pretty clear. If you ignore your audience, they'll ignore you too. Like, engage with your audience. and be as relatable as possible. And make sure, all in all, make sure you're having fun and you're enjoying yourself too. Podcasting is a blast. You are hopefully one day getting paid to talk about what you love and share your interests with people. And there's really no better feeling. And again, anybody can do it in whatever career field you're in. So even if you're not interested in sports, even if you don't go into a career that is media related, if you work I know teachers that have podcasts. There are teaching podcasts that teachers share stories of crazy things that happen with students in class or funny stories of students in class. And they're amazing. I'm not a teacher. I have zero interest in teaching. I love those because I used to be a kid. I remember what I did in school. You can find podcasts and you can find angles for any interest that you have. So explore it and have fun with it. And that's going to be the best thing for you. So.